Tonight I'm excited to welcome David Remnick to Cambridge to discuss his book, The Bridge, The Life and Rise of Barack Obama. Mr. Remnick has been the editor of The New Yorker since 1998, having previously been a staff writer for the magazine and the Washington Post's Moscow correspondent. He has written 5 previous books, including King of the World, a biography of Muhammad Ali, which the New York Times named one of the best nonfiction books of 1998, and Lenin's Tomb, which earned Mr. Remnick a Pulitzer Prize in 1994. His newest book, The Bridge, is a biography of Barack Obama. There have been a number of books written about the president, but Mr. Remnick has taken a journalistic approach, offering a detailed, multifaceted, and complete account of the president's life. Through interviews with those who have known Obama best, close readings of the president's writings, and interviews with Obama himself, Mr. Remnick presents not just the facts of the president's life, but an interpretation of Obama's role in American history and insights into Obama's own understanding of his place in the narrative of our country. The New York Times called the book incisive, filled with insight and nuance, and Gwen Ifill, in a review for the Washington Post, said of The Bridge, Remnick deserves credit for telling Obama's story more completely than others, for lending a reporter's zeal to the task, for not ducking the discussion of race, and for peeling back several layers of the onion that is Barack Obama.
Thank you very much. I've never been in the pulpit before. Not this kind. Thanks for having me. And it's my experience in these circumstances, not that they happen every day to me, that it's a great deal more fun to have a conversation rather than me speechify. Let me just say a few things first, though. It is a good feeling to be here for many reasons. One of them, though, is that the origins of this book are here, and maybe I should explain. I have a day job. I haven't written a book since that day job began. The last book I read, the last real book I've written was a book called King of the World, which is about Muhammad Ali and race in America in the late 50s and early 60s. And about 5.5 seconds after that book came out, through circumstances too bizarre to recount here at the moment, I became the editor of The New Yorker. I became the editor of The New Yorker having had the previous editing experience of having been the editor of the Pascack Valley Smoke Signal, which is the school newspaper, as you all know, of the Pascack Valley fighting, wait for it, Indians. Indians Smoke Signal. Very clever. And probably illegal by now, or should be. And I published that book, and that was it. And I've been working ever since happily, ecstatically, and hard on doing what I can each week with The New Yorker, which is a joyfully difficult and interesting job. And along the way, in order to get out of the house, some people go to the beach, some people take a trip to Europe, some people take a walk, or some people are said to enjoy the great outdoors. As Woody Allen once said, I am at two with nature. And I'm very happy to print all kinds of pieces about the environment, and we very ferociously defend it in our comment section and elsewhere in the magazine, but I'm glad it's there for you. I'm an indoor sport kind of guy. But what I like to do once in a while, instead of wearing a deep, well-worn groove between where I live in the West 80s in New York and Times Square, where my office is once in a while to get out of the house, I write a story for the magazine, a kind of busman's holiday. And one of the pieces that I wrote was in the thick of the election campaign, now of great memory, but it was a bonanza for my business, I have to say, and I think in the end, perhaps even for the country. But I wrote a piece in a special election issue for the magazine called The Joshua Generation, which came out the week after Obama's election. We took a leap of faith and thought that he would win. And there was it was an issue of the magazine that had 4 pieces in it, one by George Packer about the potential for Obama to become a Rooseveltian democratic reformer. We can talk about that, how that's gone so far. There was a piece about the ill-fated McCain campaign by David Grann, who's written a wonderful book that I recommend to everybody called The Lost City of Z. And there was a piece, yes, by my colleague and the Washington correspondent Ryan Lizza about the Obama ground game. In other words, the mechanics of the election and how he won. And my piece was about race and politics and Obama. Fine, the piece was published. November happened. I went back to work. And then something horrific happened in the history of our magazine, probably our most exalted contributor, and I think in many ways the most exalted contributor in the history of the magazine, no matter what you may think of White or Thurber or Salinger or anybody else, but certainly the most long-standing, astonishing contributor to the magazine, John Updike died. And I went to the funeral, which was north of Boston, in a very modest Episcopal church. It was not a memorial service, a glamorous memorial service, New York or Boston style, where glamorous people get up and give amusing speeches about the qualities of the dearly beloved friend, but rather it was a very serious traditional Episcopal service. My friend and colleague Henry Finder and I attended, and I came back here and stayed here on for a couple of extra days. I don't know why. But I called up various colleagues of Barack Obama, teachers of Barack Obama at Harvard Law School, thinking, maybe there's something in here, something more than the piece I wrote. And I went to see Lawrence Tribe, a constitutional lawyer whose name you probably know, Martha Minow, who's now the dean of the law school, Charles Ogletree spoke to, a number of people, David Wilkins, other people at the law school. And the more I spoke to them, or listened to them, better to say, the more I realized that despite the 2 years of constant journalism about Barack Obama, the more I drilled down about just this very seemingly narrow episode in the life of Barack Obama, the more it seemed to me that this was a very rich life. And that it was possible, maybe possible, that while Obama was still in office with maybe a lot of time left on the clock, whether it's 3 years or maybe 7, that it might be possible to write what I would call a journalistic biography of Obama, using the techniques of journalism. People are still around, people are interviewable, things are readable, and with some of the tools of scholarship, whatever you want to call it, reporting is what I call it, nothing very fancy, to try to write this book about Barack Obama's life up to the White House door. Up to the White House door. The book is called The Bridge for a very simple set of reasons. The first is the opening scene of the book, and this is a book largely about race, not only, but after all, what's the radical thing about Barack Obama? Not his politics. His politics are rather conventional, center-left politics of the Democratic Party. There's not that much space in between her and Hillary Clinton in the campaign, save on one issue in particular, Iraq. What's radical about Barack Obama is that he's the first African-American president. How did this happen? Because I got to tell you, as much of a genius as I may be, when the 2004 Senate campaign was happening, and our writer Bill Finnegan came into the office and said, we must do a profile of this guy Barack Obama. Not only do I think he's going to win the Senate seat, but he may well become a presidential contender, my reaction was not printable. Not for the first time did someone say, with a name like Barack Hussein Obama, in post-9/11 America, the chances of him being a national politician, much less a presidential winner, seemed, I don't know, infinitesimal. And at that moment, I started making bets around the office of the New Yorker, all of which I lost, and I'm a poorer man for it. We may be a richer country for it, though. And so the book is called The Bridge because the opening scene of the book is at a very distinct bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge. You know this bridge. It's a bridge that spans the Alabama River in Selma. It's the scene of one of the great violent moments in the history of the civil rights movement in March 1965, Bloody Sunday, led by now Congressman from Atlanta, John Lewis, and when hundreds of civil rights demonstrators, having picked Selma as a place to demonstrate the injustice of the disenfranchisement of Southern African Americans, began their march and were cut off by Alabama state troopers and police and vigilantes and beaten near to death, gassed, horses, dogs, the whole imagery that we know very well from Taylor Branch and other histories of that period. That happened at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Edmund Pettus, by the way, the last Confederate soldier to be a senator in the U.S. Capitol. It's also called the bridge because Barack Obama's political personality is such that he proposes from this very first book, before he's even a politician, to be someone who bridges American communities, American ethnicities, because he has lived in so many of them. So there's a metaphorical bridge that Obama is. There's a historical bridge that Obama is part of in terms of his historical epic and progress. And also there's a very specific bridge. So I came to Harvard Law School and began to discuss, after all, he was a law student, big deal. But in fact, the more you talk and the more you listen and come back and listen, you discover that the person who's now the President of the United States, in some small way, or maybe in a very large way, discovered both his political personality at the law school here and also his sense of greater ambition. What do I mean by that? Well, his political personality is one that prides itself deeply on his sense of his capacity to be a conciliator. To someone who, because he's a kind of cultural translator, someone who was born in the odd circumstances he was, in multicultural Honolulu, but multicultural lacking African Americans except on military bases. As someone who grew up with the elusive ghost of a Kenyan father and the presence of a Kansan mother and grandparents who raised him, that he was somebody who had built this personality, who had come to this personality over time. And when he ran for the most exalted office that Harvard Law School has to offer, the presidency of the Law Review, I mean, some of you would think, big deal. It's a student-run academic journal that no one reads. And you would be right. But here at Harvard Law School, which does not lack for ego, where everyone in the class no doubt imagines himself or herself to be a potential great leader or captain of industry or captain of an investment bank or worse, and when some preposterous number of people run for this office, Obama prevails. Why did he prevail? He prevailed at a time when there was a liberal majority at the Harvard Law School, but a growing conservative constituency from the Federalist Society. And the Federalist kids were under no illusion that Obama was a conservative. But the Federalist constituency at the Law Review voted for Obama, as well as many of the liberals, and that was his victory. That's how he won. He beat a fellow liberal. And the next morning, Obama is within a week, he's in the New York Times, he's in the Boston Globe, and news of his election as the first African-American president of the Harvard Law Review is national news. Imagine, you're a kid whose biggest accomplishment before that had been, I don't know, graduating. Now you're national news. So there's the birth of his ambition is right here. The birth, to some degree, of his political personality is right here. And so at each step of the way, what the book tries to do, what the bridge tries to do, is dive deep into personal episodes, whether it's family history or his schooling or his experience as a community organizer, or completely missing from his own autobiography, his whole political life as a state senator and as a losing congressional candidate, and look at how this plays out. And race is a gigantic and predominant theme throughout. We can discuss this each step along the way, whether it's him losing to Bobby Rush, a former power in the Black Panthers in Illinois, or how he won his Senate race in 2004 because his political personality had been transformed further from 2000 to 2004. And the other aspect of the book is the way all of this personal history, which seems rather straightforward, intersects with big chunks of American history, whether it's the intersection of Chicago and racial politics, whether it's the strangeness of Honolulu, whether it's the powerful personality, also quite missing from his own autobiography, not of his father, but of his mother, who's not a simple character at all, who's not just a kind of naive 60s figure that we kind of got in a lot of the press accounts during the campaign. So history, as it clashes with, as it intersects with, as it weaves with the growth of a man and how he becomes himself, how he pursues his own identity, is the shape of this book. Now, this is a story that I think we all have lived with. You don't have to have, I'm guessing that very few of you have read this book. It's only been out for a couple of weeks, and it's more than one reviewer has described it charitably as exhaustive, which in my experience as an editor is a euphemism for long. So you can be forgiven for not having read this, but you know the frame of the story a little bit. So I thought we'd begin a discussion. We can talk about various episodes of Obama's life in response to questions. So if anybody has them, I'm here as long as you are. And just I beg of one thing. Have them be questions rather than kind of petitions or statements or things that I can't respond to.
Well, you made a very good development of character in the book to the extent I read it. And my question comes from takeoff on Aristotle's Poetics, that character reveals itself in action. And my question is, as you also have great imagination as a writer, if the situation is that it's beyond any reasonable doubt, three different independent sources inform Obama that Iranians have their nuclear weapons, and in line with what even the previous moderate president said, they are willing to use it to nuke Israel, and Obama is confronted with this information. As you mentioned, betting. Suppose you had $1 million to bet, you had to bet. You cannot predict the future. Which way would you bet? What will we do?
I'm glad to say that gambling is illegal in both the states of New York and Massachusetts. Am I right? Okay. Look, this you've pardon me? Not for long. Not for long. Well, let's sneak it in under the wire here. You've asked a terrific question, to which if I were, on television and playing the role of the journalist on television, I'd immediately have to come up with a flip answer. I have no flip answer. I don't know. Let's start with that premise.
But you know the character.
Okay, here's the problem. There is no good outcome to any of this. Your description of Iran is not wrong. Iran is led by people who make no bones of their analysis both of history and their view of the Middle East. And their relationship with Syria and Hezbollah, you know it all. And their confrontation with Israel is well known. A nuclear-armed Israel, I might add, and should add. What is the United States to do? Well, the thing that we're doing now, and the thing that we've been engaged in for a very long time, is the worst option, which is to say almost nothing. It seems to me that anything in between has not come to fruition, which is to say sanctions, and that's what Obama is engaged in now. And so the next couple of weeks are said to be telling about the trying to coalesce a force for serious sanctions against Iran in terms of its nuclear program. I mean, if it gets to the next stage, which is to say the United States or Israel are both attacking Iran, God help us all. It is not, this is not a Cyric and one reactor in the middle of the Iraqi desert 30 years ago. You know what you know this as well as I do.
Yes.
That was dangerous enough and successful
And
in
the
the breach.
sanctions won't work, this we know too.
Well, we don't know that. We don't know that for sure, do we?
So what will he do, you think?
I think that he's making all the efforts he can in terms of sanctions, but it's been sadly.
But what will be the action? He has to act.
I think I've answered your question.
Okay.
Okay.
Good evening.
Hi.
I look forward to reading your book.
Thank you.
And I enjoy The New Yorker every week.
Bless you. I shouldn't say that. I should say this here. I'm a little fatutzt where this is concerned, okay?
Thank you.
Yeah, Unitarian. So I should get my guitar. Okay.
And my wife is a card-carrying Unitarian.
Okay, I'm
who
in
wishes
trouble.
she could be here.
There's no good. This could go wrong in so many ways.
I have a much more general, non-nuclear question for you. Given the fact that you're describing Barack Obama, as many people have, as a conciliator at heart. I mean, that's sort of what's in his blood, perhaps.
He can try, but the healthcare drama tells us that good luck with that.
Yeah, and
the powers of conciliation with the Republican Party came to naught.
Right.
And any successful conciliation that was done was within his own party.
Mm-hmm. So my question.
So it's a hell of a lot easier to become the Harvard Law Review president, and while it's happening, gain a kind of self-regard in terms of the power of conciliation. But when it comes to politics in the modern world, this is a hell of a thing. But
that was essentially what I wanted to have you discuss further, is the challenges that he faces being a conciliator at heart and yet in a highly partisan environment in Washington.
Look, let's be honest. This business of being a conciliator is nice during the campaign. It's a fine thing if we lived in a political culture where this could, the Republican Party were a more diverse party, when I was a kid, there were creatures that walked the earth called liberal Republicans, even moderate Republicans. It was Jacob Jab. I mean, you know the history.
Full right church.
Sure. And now you have parties like this. Although I would argue, and I don't think this is a partisan argument, I think it's borne out that the Republican Party has moved much farther to the right than the Democratic Party has budged. Mm-hmm. I think that's true. And in fact, one could easily argue that there are more conservative Democrats now than there were even in the Reagan era, although, of course, during the Johnson era and before, the Democratic Party was a redoubt of segregationist politics.
Right.
So, good luck on that conciliation thing is what I would say. I mean, this is not something that's been very promising so far.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'm afraid I'm a New Yorker subscriber too.
Don't be afraid.
And
Be not afraid, as the Pope
I haven't
once
read
said.
your book, but I noticed that you said that a dominant theme was race. So my question succinctly is this. What role is race playing right now in the opposition to not only the Democratic Party's proposals in the Congress, but to Obama himself? And I'm struck by what I think of as the exaggerated rhetoric that's being used, particularly in the Tea Party movement and so on, communist, thug, socialist, so on, that kind of thing, the birthing movement. And I'm just wondering, as a reporter, as well as an editor, is the racial issue really a driving force in the opposition?
I don't think with everybody, but I think that when you hear rhetoric about we want our country back, it can't just mean the marginal tax rate, which hasn't changed. So, look, something radical happened in this country, really too late, far later than it should have, but something radical occurred in this country. You have a black president. You have a man named Barack Hussein Obama. And this does not, and Obama never expected it to, and we should never have expected it to sit easily with every single citizen in the United States. That's not to say there isn't a legitimate conservative opposition, as there should be, and ferocious political debate, as there should be, but some part of this rhetoric, both on the air and elsewhere, I don't need to be more specific than that, it's pretty obvious, is alarming, And I don't mean just a couple of messages put on John Lewis's machine. I'm sure he's gotten messages like that before. But I mean to hear some of the rhetoric coming out of some of the lead politicians who are gaining from this, whether it's some vision of votes down the line or media dollars in the interim. The language of divide that plays on these fears and anxieties is alarming.
Thank you.
David, it's really nice to see you again.
Thank you.
I haven't had a chance to read the new biography yet. I did read the biography of Ali and really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to this new one. So the question that I want to ask relates to a question I asked you the last time I saw you. You were at the Brattle Theater. And the question I asked you then was about Mayor Bloomberg in New York City and his stance, his position on gun violence and the gun issue in America. So without having read this biography, that's really the question I want to ask you about
gun violence?
President Obama's position, stance on, let's call it the gun issue in America. I know, for instance, in the magazine The New Yorker, he campaigned once with, I think, Senator Webb in Virginia. And I can almost remember the quotes. He said, he went in with Webb and he said, told those people, he said, I'm not going to take your guns away, the hunters. So based on all of the work you've done, I wonder if you would comment on that. It's related to relation.
Sure, thanks. Look, clearly there's a big difference between taking shotguns away from bird hunters and the problems we have in the country, whether with handguns or automatic weapons, things that plague our cities, things that plague our country. But it's very, very difficult, as you know, to win a national election and start parsing the gun issue and expect to win independent voters. It's very, very difficult. This is one of these things that's very particular to American politics. Now, this is one of the amazing things about Obama, that in a campaign, because of who he is, because of his particular rhetorical talents, and yes, even to some degree because of race, was able to channel and echo a certain degree of what you would call a prophetic voice in American politics, whether it was King or anybody else. But keep in mind always that Barack Obama is not an outsider pressuring power. He is power itself. He was running for power, and now he is power. And despite these skills, there's a different pressure on him, a different set of strictures on him. And we should also put pressure on it as journalists and citizens. Now, do I believe when he goes home at night that Barack Obama gives a damn if gay men and women marry? I really do not. However, as a politician, he won't go that far, not yet, because he thinks that there's way, way, way too many people that he would be getting out too far ahead of to win election. And on guns, it's another instance. Do I think Barack Obama wants to see the volume of guns on the street that we have in America today? No, I don't. But I think this is one of those areas, like gay marriage, where he has been withholding. Let's just put it that way, and I think I'm being charitable that way. He has not been bold at all.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi. I believe that you covered in your book the theory of WorldNet Daily columnist Jack Cashel,
Yeah.
that Bill Ayers had a significant role in helping Barack Obama
Can I,
write?
for everybody else, can I fill in the background?
Yes.
There was a theory on the internet by a man named Jack Cashel that Bill Ayers was the ghostwriter for Barack Obama's first book, the highly praised first book. And it was a theory that got great currency online, and Rush Limbaugh, who has an enormous audience, also propounded it. That's the background. I don't endorse this view.
Are you aware of the book by Christopher Anderson, Michelle and Barack, A Marriage?
I am.
Where he more or less endorses that theory, and I believe he has a number of other sources on that.
Yeah, I don't buy it. I don't buy it. It's completely unconvincing. I think, you know, I have to say something. There's a long history in this country, beginning with the slave narratives, of black men and women writing books and white audiences doubting their literacy. Frederick Douglass had to get an endorsement from Garrison, right? Had to get an endorsement from Garrison, who wrote on the book, Frederick Douglass is the author of this book, the great abolitionist. Now, I would hope that in the modern era, we wouldn't have to do this anymore, because the evidence for this, the evidence that Barack Obama somehow didn't write his book, is nil. So
Why would this Christopher Anderson
he-
really? Let me just finish.
name a source for Christopher Anderson's theory.
He doesn't name the source.
No, he doesn't.
But, however, the book is not is a pro-Obama book. He had no vested interest. As far as I can see, he has no vested interest.
Sir, all I
in
can
pushing
tell you
that
is
theory.
that I respectfully disagree. So,
He's written a number of books.
okay,
Please allow someone else to
I
ask
answered
the
your
question.
question, sir, best as I could.
I just started. I'm right at the part about page 55 where his father is starting to fall apart. But just the first question I asked you to project, I'm going to ask you to react, and you touched on it a little bit.
Sure.
And I just want to make one general comment. I come from a different world than you do here. I'm from Lynn, and I'm back in Lynn now. And
You're back in where, sir?
Lynn, Massachusetts. On the way to John Updike's funeral.
It was a long way for me, too, I got to tell you.
But it's a different world. And
I mean, if you had told me when I was a 15-year-old kid that I'd be associated with John Updike in anything other than buying a paperback at a drugstore, you could have knocked me down with a feather, but go ahead.
But what I see is from my friends from high school who didn't go on to college and are living their lives out, and it's reflected nationally in some of the numbers. And I believe there is definitely a racist element to their views that's not explicit, but it's there. They really don't like this guy, and even despite, you just touched on the gun issue, despite what hasn't happened, there's a mistrust. He's never going to win these people. They're just not going to be there electorally for him. And maybe if they're not mobilized,
all I can
that's
say,
a
sir, is
victory.
that history comes hard. And there was never a question. And I have to say, having interviewed Obama about this, I think his answer about this, and it comes in the end of the book in the epilogue, in which is hundreds of pages from where you are, but I swear you'll get there.
I'm in for it.
By around the time that we're playing you in the playoffs,
Okay.
you'll get there.
Football?
We're going to win.
Football playoffs.
Football playoffs. I don't see it for us this year.
But I just wanted.
No, but let me answer your
sorry.
question.
Sure.
You're right. You're right. And Obama had this problem even when he was facing Hillary. You're talking about white working class voters, not least men. He has this problem.
His favorability is probably about 25% with that group, high school education and less, is my guess. And I haven't seen it lately. But
This
that's
is a
where
big
it was.
political problem for him. We're not disagreeing.
I'll give you a real example.
And I also want to say, I don't think everybody who somehow opposes Barack Obama is even remotely a racist. I want to be completely clear about
This
that.
particular group, in my personal experience, that includes reading my book, not yours. It was before yours came out, but this will happen. I was sitting in my little daytime restaurant, and somebody comes in, who's got the Barack Obama stickers? Me. And he starts yelling and screaming, he's ruining my kid's future. So I stood up and told him to leave, and he did. But, that's, but it was still
I would too. Yeah.
It was very unpleasant. But just the one question I had in terms of projections, what really struck me during healthcare was when he sat down with the Republican members of the Senate, and I think there were House members there too, and just ate their lunch. They had, the thing that was televised, and that went on for, if we read your book aloud, it was like that long. So it was 6 hours anyway. But no,
Thank you.
But
Thank
just,
you.
just
No,
do you have any
your
comments?
point is a good one.
I don't have a point. I have the question
Oh, I'm
is,
sorry.
what does that tell us about him as we go?
What tells us is that different people have had a different, are farther along or less far along in that absorbing this new historical thing under the sun. Period. Okay.
I was wondering what the most surprising thing that you learned reporting the book was.
What the most surprising thing?
About Barack Obama.
Many things. But certainly one thing is how much good fortune has smiled on him, too. I mean, we tend to forget that. Take the Senate race of 2004. You know this story? It's an incredible story. Here's a guy who was a state senator. Everybody raise your hand if you know who your state senator is. Okay, well, this is a pretty educated bunch. Okay, can I tell you? I have no idea. State senator in the state of Illinois is not, let's just say, it's not like, being president of the world or anything. It's retail politics. Some of your constituents know who you are, some don't. Barack Obama was a state senator from the South Side. He ran unopposed, practically unopposed, some symbolic campaigns against him. Then he ran for Congress in 2000 against Bobby Rush. Not a good idea. And he lost by more than 2-1. He was sick of Springfield. His wife said, "Look, darling, you're finished with politics. You can do good. And you were the president of the Harvard Law Review. Time to, a little bit of money would be nice. You can do good and do well. Maybe run a foundation. Enough." This is a woman who grew up on the South Side. She had the kind of skepticism of electoral politics that anybody who's grown up on the South Side of Chicago would have. He basically prevailed in an argument and said, "Give me one more chance. One more chance. And if I lose, I'll go teach a little, I'll write a little, I'll make some money, and we'll be fine." So he runs for Senate in 2004. Completely open race because Carol Moseley Braun weirdly, inexplicably decided not to run for Senate, but for president. And Obama runs for Senate in a wide open race in Illinois in 2004. And on the Democratic side for the primary, there's a guy named Blair Hull. Blair Hull, who the hell is that? Blair Hull made his money first playing counting cards in blackjack, and then he made a fortune in the financial services industry. And Blair Hull was prepared to spend money like Mike Bloomberg, and he did. And Blair Hull, despite being not the most capable politician in the world, was leading the race. This wide open race. Barack Obama was doing okay. He was planning to run a lot of commercials toward the end, and he was quite possibly going to make a move, but he was behind. Then the Chicago Tribune forced open Blair Hull's divorce records, and they were filled with things like hitting his wife, all sorts of things that you wouldn't want to say even in a Unitarian church, even accompanied by any musical instrument you can name. Stroke of luck number one. Then he gets a phone call from the Democratic Party in Boston saying, "State Senator Obama, would you like to be the keynote speaker at the convention in Boston?" And so, stroke of luck number two, and he becomes a national figure. Also, his Republican candidate was going to be very strong. His name was Jack Ryan, incredibly handsome. He made a fortune at an investment bank that's had a very, very bad week this week. But it didn't stop there. He then did, having done well, he did good and gave a lot of his money to schools for underprivileged African-American kids, predominantly on the South Side, and even taught there. So he's a very attractive figure, a conservative, but that was going to be a clash until his divorce records were open. He had been married to, you Star Trek fans will recall, and Boston Public fans will recall, Jerry Ryan. And let's keep it modest here. French sex clubs were involved. Let's just say that Jack Ryan withdrew his name from the candidacy. And who did Barack Obama end up running for in 2004 for Senate? Alan Keyes. Now, let me just say, in American politics, if your only gateway between you and the kingdom of heaven is Alan Keyes, you don't need a key. Barack Obama was bringing in so much money for that campaign that he started giving it away to other races around the country. So one chapter is, quite long chapter, is devoted to this political odyssey. And the morning after winning, and becoming, by the way, the only black senator, and one of very few, of course, since Reconstruction, what are the first questions directed at Barack Obama 5.5 seconds after leaving the exalted State House of Springfield, Illinois? When are you running for president? So this element, too, is important to understand and to kind of limb out in the political drama of Barack Obama. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you for all you do with The New Yorker.
Thank you.
The book. I wanted to hearken back to the point at which he actually got elected and ask you what your feeling is. There's a lot of optimism around the fact that we actually elected, a black president, and yet, what strikes me is that it's maybe kind of a false optimism because he was really neck and neck with McCain in August and September, pale.
And then the economy collapsed.
And then the economy collapsed. And if the economy had not collapsed...
And McCain did not acquit himself well when this happened. I mean, he really kind of went to pieces.
Not my forte, and so on.
No, that's not a good thing to say.
He really, Obama really pulled ahead when the economy collapsed. And I just was wondering whether that struck you too as... what really brought us...
Your analysis is right. I don't know, if you're projecting toward the next presidential candidacy, if I've learned anything as a reporter, if I've learned anything as a citizen, to start predicting what's going to happen in a presidential race 3 years out, 2.5 years out, is nuts. Not that we don't do it every Sunday morning on those shows that Calvin Trillin once memorably called the Sabbath gas bags. So don't let me add to the hot air. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know.
I wasn't thinking of, the future.
Yeah.
I was thinking of the sense of optimism in the country, or that we might have about the voters, it wasn't really about
as James Carville so memorably put it, it's the economy, stupid. And when you have 9.7, is that what it is, the unemployment rate now, 9.7 or so? That's very high. And it's nice that the stock market is higher, especially if you live in certain precincts of America. But a jobless rate is really staring any sitting president in the face. That's really difficult. And we're in Afghanistan, and our putative ally seems to have become a kind of figure out of Garcia Marquez, and a lot of other things. So nothing is ever a lock.
I was hoping you could comment a little bit about motivation or identity politics and sort of what you think is sort of the motivation behind this guy.
Obama.
Obama, yeah. So,
look, I think he's a terrifically ambitious guy.
Well, that's my point. Sometimes it's almost...
and I don't see anything wrong with that.
Well, no. But it almost feels like... we can talk about it. It almost feels like it brings up, archetypes that we have in our head. It makes for a very good story, but
Thank
it's
goodness.
real life. And I'm the son of East African immigrants. When I moved to Boston, I moved to a section of the city.
Where from?
Ethiopia. I have a graduate degree. When I moved to Boston, I moved to a section of the city that's very working class white, and I just recently got interested in politics. But going simple things in going door to door and meeting
What's the
people.
question, though? What's the question?
The question is, why do you think this guy is doing? After speaking with his law school professors, after speaking with people who've known him, why would anybody want to do this?
Oh. Can I be honest with you? I think anybody who ever wants to do this is some component crazy. I mean, just the act of ego to go in front of an entire nation and propose yourself as the ideal person to lead it. It's the stuff of which psychotherapeutic sessions are made. However, thankfully some are less crazy than others. I'm older than you are. I remember Richard Nixon, and Obama's very funny about this too. I think in one of the head pieces to one of the chapters, Obama even talked about the slightly unhinged aspect of the prospect of running for president. Look, I think, as he proved as a young man, there's a big element of idealism there. There's also a big element of ambition, and that's where they come together in politics.
Hi, thanks for coming. Interviewing Obama must have been a momentous experience for you, both personally and for your book. And I was wondering if you could just describe that experience and offer any personal reflections and reflections as a reporter and editor.
Truth in advertising, there aren't, skeins of interviews here. There are a couple, but, the last time I saw him was in the Oval Office, and it was like out of an Edgar Allan Poe story, right? The Oval Office is the least decorated room one can imagine. It's very spare. Obama speaks very deliberately, especially with a print interview. He's forming whole paragraphs and transcribing it as a piece of cake. You never have to stop the tape. And there's never a comma, semicolon, or clause out of position. And because of this deliberate atmosphere, you can hear in the background click, 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 click of the grandfather clock right there. And it is a little unnerving. But it's not a torrent. To interview Bill Clinton is to be on the receiving end of a fascinating torrent of language and ideas, and have you read this, and have you read that, and that reminds me of this. It's a very different experience. Obama, now remember, he's in office, so he's more careful than he would have been X years ago. But it's a very deliberate feel. That's how I describe it.
Hi. I'd love to hear your thoughts about Obama and the personal projection of power, which is, a fundamental element that a president has to draw on when you're talking to
more
Putin
and more in the media age,
Wen
sure.
Jiabao
Sure.
and the Republican leadership. And where does that come from within his person? Is there a strength there that you see? How does he project it? What does he have to learn? I think back to the first Kennedy-Khrushchev dialogue, and then
in the first Kennedy-Khrushchev dialogue, Kennedy got his backside kicked.
Exactly.
He was wet behind the ears. I will say this about Obama. One thing where he's a neophyte. Thank you. Sure. One thing where he's a neophyte is that he has not succeeded in making close relationships with foreign leaders. This is not unimportant. It's not everything. I mean, we're grown-ups. We know that policy is the most important thing. But there is a personal element to politics, and a lot of foreign political leaders, and I don't mean just Bibi Netanyahu, have been frustrated in their attempts, however clumsy, however they're done, to get a warmer, more cohesive sense of their relationship with him. I was just talking with a very well-connected German journalist the other day who was saying that even though Angela Merkel is the European that gets talked about in the most glowing terms in the White House, she's frustrated with her ability to connect in a way that she was able to connect with Bush. Now, Bush was in office for a hell of a lot longer. And and gave massages, that's true. Surprisingly enough. But there's that element there, too. Yes, ma'am.
Given your knowledge of Obama and also of the times, whose presidency do you think his will most resemble?
Whose presidency will his most resemble? I don't know. I'll think about it maybe after the last question. I'll see if I can come up with an answer, or elegantly not. I'll try.
Good to be here. I'm not going to heckle you, but
It's all right.
I remember the cover you guys
You know,
ran.
I was 1 second away from getting away. You want to talk about the cover from a year and a half ago?
The cover, the controversial cover. I'm an illustrator,
Yeah.
and I thought it was really smart.
Mhm.
And
Not everybody
I got
did.
it. I don't
Right.
know. Not everyone got it, but
Oh, dear God.
do you think that there's that sort of misconception of Obama, like from the cover, just
All I can
sort
say
of
is...
people judging him
Sure.
on
Let me
race
remind
and-
those few who don't remember this. A year ago last July was the silly season of the presidential race. These races all have a certain rhythm to it. July is, you already know who the candidates are, but the general election campaign hasn't begun, which tends to begin after the conventions in August. It was not lost on us at the New Yorker, and probably not lost on you, that some unbelievable percentage of Americans, and what the gentleman was talking about before, some unbelievable percentage, an alarming percentage of Americans had come to believe, whether on their own or much more likely thanks to certain media outlets, that Barack Obama was lying about his religion, that he wasn't born in Honolulu, that he wasn't a citizen, that he was a closet radical, that he was soft on terrorism, that his wife was the second coming of Angela Davis, that in all, somehow, something deeply, deeply conspiratorial and deceptive was going on. Polls showed enormous numbers, very disturbing numbers, and do today on certain of these things. I mean, this is I haven't been asked, you're the last questioner, so unless you're going to ask me, was he born in Honolulu, this is the first time I've had one of these sessions where I haven't gotten that question. But a lot of people believe this. So Barry Blitt, who is a satirist and who had done, I don't know how many covers about the Bush administration and Ahmadinejad and all this rest, and he's not gentle about it, took these fantastical images and put it all into one and had the Obamas doing the so-called terrorist fist jab, as they pronounced it on Fox, terrorist fist jab. I think I first saw that in the NBA when I was 10 by that well-known terrorist Cedric Maxwell or something. A great player, by the way. Even I admit this readily. A great player. And put this in, and the image was called The Politics of Fear. The Obama people didn't like it so much. Okay, can I just say one thing? As an editor who's been criticized for being soft on Obama, we don't publish for the President of the United States. We don't publish for politicians' high opinion. I'm sorry if somebody, well, sort of sorry, if somebody is offended. But that's the nature of satire. Sometimes it's going to piss people off. Sometimes it's going to provoke discussion. Sometimes it's going to engender agreement. And all those things happen then. And I'll say this, and not for the first time, I know, at the risk of being repetitious, and I got thousands of emails and letters. A lot of them inform various organizations doing a kind of email bomb. Like my email looked like a cash register, a particularly lucrative cash register. And the most dominant comment was, I got it, but those people out there, they won't get it, and they will use it as some sort of dangerous tool. That never happened. And I have to say, the notion that people out there are stupid and that we here get it is disturbing to me. I totally respect everybody in the room and everybody in the audience and beyond who disagrees with me, who thought that went too far, who thought it didn't read right, or something. I totally respect that. But the notion that somehow I get it and everybody else is stupid, that I have a bigger problem with. And so ends the sermon.
If you want to do another one, I'll do one.
And I will tell you, thank you. I heard you, as they taught me to say in management school. The coda to this, you don't have to sit all the way in the back. I will say the coda to this, to show you the Obama's deep and abiding hatred for me in the New Yorker afterwards, I picked up People magazine 6 months later, and I saw there was a little interview with Michelle Obama. What do you do to relax? Well, I watch some junk TV, and I love to read the New Yorker. 2 months later, I get a phone call. Obama was having a really bad time. He was the healthcare thing was going nowhere fast. And we did Barry Blitt, same artist, did a 4-panel cover of Obama walking on water, and then in the last panel, he falls in. The magazine comes out Monday morning. Monday at 10:15, I get a phone call from Eric Lesser, the assistant to David Axelrod. David, the president, and David Axelrod were just in here laughing and laughing and laughing. Could you send the president a signed copy of the cover? So Barry got a signed copy of the cover. He signed it, and he said, "Dear Mr. President, please stay dry. Yours, Barry Blitt."
Given
such is the pernicious relationship between power and the press.
Given Obama's characteristic caution, and his training in the law school, do you have an insight into the reason why he would have tried to cross swords at the State of the Union speech with the Supreme Court, so notably?
Well, I don't think he thought that was off limits. I think he thought, look, I'm not a mind reader, but it's pretty self-evident that if he included it, he thought it, that this is a particularly far-reaching decision that's going to have a deleterious effect on American politics. And this from someone who I hasten to remind you, when given the opportunity, forewent his, can we say forewent?
Yes.
Forewent, thank you. Forewent his pledge and decided it would be advantageous to his presidential campaign to take any and all monies. And he outspent John McCain by a tremendous amount. So he is not a purist and an idealist where this is concerned. But I think I think a lot of politics hides in plain sight. A lot of us want to think about the secrets. Is Obama really this? I think a lot of it hides in plain sight, and I think this is another instance of that. So with that, I thank you. I wish I could come up with somebody asked me, what was the last question? What president is he like? I think we won't know till the end, which is a lame way to end this presentation. But I really thank you for coming out, and I suppose I'll sign books here if you've got them. Thanks.